Hello, and welcome back to another episode of 8-Bit Monsters Monster Deconstruction for D&D 5th Edition. On today's episode, we're going to look at the shape-changing, terrifying werewolf that you see in the movies and occasionally in Dungeons & Dragons. The werewolf can be found in the Monsters Manual on page 211, and this werewolf is rated at a CR3 for 700 XP. If we take a look in Xanathar's Guide for Encounter Building, we'll see that this can be a solo monster for party members of levels 1 to 4, and this could be an epic solo monster for a party of 5 level 2 players, or a party of 4 level 3 players. Next, let's take a look at the TLDW. The DCR for our werewolf is 3, surprisingly, the OCR is 1, and the FCR is a 2. Which is shocking considering that the printed CR of our werewolf is actually a 3. If you're curious to see why this werewolf has higher than usual defenses and lower than usual offenses, then let's move on to the skills and traits and continue on. In the skills and traits section, we'll know that our werewolf has a proficiency bonus of +2 since it's rated for CR3. Our werewolf only has one skill, and that's perception at +4. Considering that the werewolf has a +0 for its wisdom bonus, the +4 is actually coming from its proficiency bonus and also being an expert at perception. Now, the interesting thing about our werewolf is that it actually comes with damage immunities, and those immunities are for piercing, slashing, bludgeoning, and non-magical weapons that aren't silvered. So our werewolf is actually immune to all attacks from non-magical weapons or basic mundane weapons that aren't silvered. Because of these damage immunities and the low CR value, we're actually going to give our werewolf an effective HP bonus of ×2. So this is something new we haven't looked at yet, and a good thing to cover as some of the other monsters and higher level monsters will actually have this bonus towards the hit points. So we'll just keep a note of that for later on when we get to the DCR. Moving down into our traits for the werewolf, we'll see that our werewolf has Shape Changer, which allows the werewolf to change from humanoid to hybrid or to wolf form. These changes don't give any kind of special effect to the werewolf, and we don't have to take note of this for the DCR or the OCR. So let's look at the next trait that it has, Keen Hearing and Smell. Luckily as well, if we were to look at the monster trait section, we'll see that the Keen Hearing and Smelling gives no effect as well. So all we have to worry about is the effective HP bonus that the werewolf is getting from damage immunities. Now that we have all those covered and out of the way, let's jump right into the DCR. Our werewolf has an actual HP of 58, which comes from its 98 plus 18 hit dice. This will end up rating us at a DCR of 3. Now, because we have the damage immunities, we actually have to multiply the actual hit points by 2, which will give us our effective HP. The effective HP then becomes 118, which puts us into the realm of a DCR 4, which we'll see in the chart. Now that we have our effective hit points established, we can see that our werewolf has an effective AC of 11 when in human form, or 12 when in hybrid or wolf form. Now, there's really no difference between these two shifts because of the expected AC. Let's take a look at our chart and see where this actually puts us for our werewolf's DCR. When we go into the chart and we look for 118, we'll see that it puts us at a DCR 4. And its expected AC is supposed to be 14, but because of the effective AC at 11 or 12 depending, we'll see that this is either a -2 or -3 under the expected, and because of the rules that D&D put in place, this is only a -1 shift from DCR 4 to DCR 3. Now this is pretty interesting considering that a lot of our monsters have had extremely low DCRs and extremely high OCRs. This is a hint showing that our werewolf is probably going to have that lower OCR like we saw in the TLDW. Now that we have the DCR established, let's take a look at the OCR and see what's going on for our werewolf. Looking at the attack section of our werewolf, we'll see that it has a multi-attack, and 2 different types of multi-attacks. When in human form, our werewolf can make 2 spear attacks, and in hybrid form, the werewolf can only make 1 bite and 1 claw attack. Now, you may be asking yourself, what about wolf form? Well, unfortunately the wolf form only gets one attack, and that's bite. So since we have so many different types of attacks here, let's jump right into the spear attacks and see what the DPR is for our human form. Now the spear's DPR is 6.5 damage, and that comes from 1d8 plus 2. When we take that and multiply it by the 2 multi-attacks that it gets, it's actually going to average out to 13 average damage per round. So now that we have our human attacks out of the way, let's jump into the hybrid section and see what happens when we have a bite and a claw attack. Well, the bite attack is pretty straightforward at 6.5 average damage, coming again from the 1d8 plus 2 average damage. And the claws gets 7 points of damage coming from 2d4 plus 2. The d4 averages out to about 2.5. Multiply that by 2, we get 5, plus the 2 from its strength bonus, giving us a 7. So looking at our human form, we have 13 average damage, which would net us an OCR of 1. Our hybrid form has an average damage of 13.5, which is only half a point of damage higher, which will also net us into the OCR 1 range. But what about wolf form, since it only has one bite attack? Well, that's pretty straightforward. The wolf form only gets the one bite, and that's 6.5 average damage. When we look at the chart later on, we'll see that 6.5 damage will be in the OCR 1/2 range, which could impact our final combat rating, which we'll see in a little bit. Now luckily we only have to worry about the effective attack bonus, since there's nothing else going on for our werewolf that will modify this rating. And that attack bonus is +4 for all of its attacks. That's great. Now we can look at the chart and move our OCR around if needed. So since our human and hybrid forms are doing the most damage, we'll take a look at that 13 average damage and compare that to our chart. When we do that, we'll see that 13 average damage nets us an OCR of 1. The expected attack bonus is +3 for an OCR of 1, and our effective attack bonus is +4. So this is only 1 over the expected, and we have no shift to the OCR. So our OCR is going to stay at 1 or 1/2, regardless of if it's the human, hybrid, or wolf forms. Now that we've established our OCR of 1 or 1/2, let's take a look at the final combat rating. Since we have a couple different ways of attacking, we're going to break these down, but luckily the human and hybrid forms are pretty much equal. So I'm going to combine those and show you the final combat rating for human and hybrid together. So we start with a DCR of 3, we add the OCR of 1, this gives us a total of 4, and then we average that out, we get a final combat rating of 2. That's actually 1 less than the printed value. What's going on here? I've got some ideas, and I'll cover that in the notes section in just a little bit. Now if we were to take a look at the wolf, we'll find that its FCR is a DCR of 3 plus an OCR of 1/2, which equals 3.5, and then when we average that out, we get 1.75. And following the rules for getting to the closest FCR, we actually have to round that up to 2. So technically, even though the wolf has less damage in its wolf form and only 1 attack, it still is considered to be an FCR of 2 for its final combat rating, even though it's 1 under the printed value. Now that we've found the human hybrid FCR and the wolf FCR, let's take a look at the notes and see what might be going on here. Note 1. The surprisingly high DCR results. And this is from the resistances. Because it's immune to pretty much all normal weapon attacks and is a low combat rating, we're going to find that most players don't have silvered weapons or magical weapons, usually at this level that they're going to be fighting a werewolf. So if our players find themselves in combat with a werewolf and not a lot of casters or magical/silvered weapons, they're in a lot of trouble and they need to get out of there fast. So without those magical or silvered weapons, they're not going to be doing any damage. The most they can do is just ward off attacks from the casters so the casters can end up doing the damage. Which is how the werewolf ends up with basically double the hit points, because casters can't do as much damage per round. Note number 2 is the wolf form, and in my view, the wolf form is primarily only for travel. In wolf form, it actually does get 10 more feet per round, but should only primarily be used for traveling. Note 3 is the human form, and I would expect it to be more of ranged combat since it can throw the spears. In hybrid form, it doesn't have any kind of ranged attack, so if the werewolf finds itself in ranged combat, more than likely it'll be in human form throwing some spears for a little while. Note 4 is about hybrid form, and the fact that it's probably more suited for melee combat. On top of that, you can also spread the lycanthrope disease to some of the players if your DM is allowing those rules. Now the final note I have here is about the effective HP bonus, and where the final combat rating of 3 came from. I have a feeling that whoever was calculating the final combat rating following these rules may not have reduced the DCR of 4 with the effective armor class. If this is the case, then our DCR would be a 4, plus an OCR of 1, which equals 5. We average that out to 2.5, and following rules, potentially this is where the CR3 came from. The fact that the DCR wasn't reduced from a 4 to a 3, possibly. I can only speculate here because I don't really know where that number came from, because I found a 2. The printed value is a 3. Who knows? So finally, did we find the CR? No, we didn't, obviously, as we saw in the TLDW. The werewolf is overrated, giving the players an XP bonus, provided they're actually able to do damage to it with magical or silvered weapons. So in this case, the werewolf should actually be a CR of 2, only giving 450 XP. Thank you for joining me as we deconstructed the werewolf from D&D 5th edition. Join us again next week as we deconstruct another monster down into its barest parts and find out what's going on to give that printed CR value. Until next time, when we deconstruct another monster from D&D 5th edition, take care everyone, and I'll see you next time.